Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. The oven timer screamed, and I yanked the door. Heat rolled out and smelled like rosemary and lemon. Grease snapped in the black roasting pan on top. Mark stood in the doorway with a stiff fork. Call me Anna, 27 and stubborn about family. I slid the pan onto a wooden trivet. The kitchen bulb buzzed and painted the tile amber. Elena lifted a water glass and kept her eyes down. Plates clinked as I set them on the table. Steam curled from the chicken and fogged the knife. The fridge hummed like a tired engine behind me. Elena twisted a napkin until thread showed white. Eat while it's hot, I said and grabbed the knife. The blade dragged through skin with a dry squeak. My apron felt rough and smelled faintly of soap. Mark's watch caught the light and flashed like a signal. Long day, Elena said and stroked her wrist bone. Her voice tried to sound normal, but made static. She nudged the salt shaker toward me without looking. The lamp threw her shadow thin and shaking. Until what time? I asked and laid meat on plates. The serving fork tapped porcelain like a metronome. She breathed in and touched the glass with cold fingers. Her shoulders lifted like a carried box. The doctor called late, she said and rubbed her eyes. The clock ticked loud over the doorway like rain. She folded the napkin again with small jerks. Light caught the wet rim on her glass. Mark scraped his chair and cleared his throat once. Some families help each other, he said and watched me. His ring clicked against the table like a coin. The ceiling light buzzed harder over his head. What kind of help? I asked and poured water slowly. The pitcher's lip clinked the rim of Elena's glass. Cold splashed my knuckles and made my skin sting. The air smelled like roasted garlic and nerves. Practical help, Mark said and speared a crispy wing. He chewed fast and wiped his mouth with care. The paper towel tore and left a white thread. The hum of the fridge filled the space. Elena pushed peas around with a dull spoon. Not tonight, she said and studied the gray wall. Her breath fogged the water glass for a second. She set the spoon down like it weighed bricks. I cut bread and crumbs skittered across the plate. The cutting board rocked and tapped the counter twice. The knife handle felt sticky with warm gravy. Mark's eyes stayed on my hands like magnets. Family should stay in the family, he said calmly. He dabbed his ring with the corner of the towel. The clock ticked between us like a dripping leak. The knife shone under the lamp like a blade on stage. Elena flinched and reached for the butter dish. Her fingers slid over the cold lid and paused. She pulled back as if the porcelain might burn. Her chair legs squealed on the floor like alarms. I tasted the chicken and found it too dry. The gravy boat sat heavy and warm by my elbow. I stirred once and watched the fat swirl slowly. The spoon clinked aside like a bell. I can drive you tomorrow, I said to Elena. My voice echoed against the tile like a misstep. I folded a towel and felt the damp stripe. Mark's fork scraped bone and set my teeth on edge. We already have numbers, he said and shook crumbs. He placed a folded card near my plate deliberately. The paper slid and stopped against my knife. The bulb flickered and made the room blink. What numbers? I asked and touched the card's corner. The print felt glossy and cool under my thumb. I did not unfold it and kept my eyes steady. The fridge motor kicked harder like a warning. Options exist, Mark said and reached for the jug. His sleeve brushed my wrist and felt like sandpaper. Water sloshed and tapped the glass with tiny knocks. The light threw his shadow long across the table. Elena stood and grabbed the sponge by the sink. I need a minute, she said and turned the tap. Soap bloomed and smelled sharp like lemon peels. The water hissed against the steel basin. I gathered bones and stacked plates near the trash. The plastic bag rustled and stuck to my hands. My skin prickled when Mark moved closer behind me. The clock clicked every second like a footstep. Think about it, he said and touched the chair. Wood creaked and the chair rocked back an inch. His voice stayed soft but pressed like a thumb. The knife on the board gleamed under the buzzing light. Elena returned with wet sleeves and red eyes. She wiped the counter with slow circles and sighs. The sponge dripped and left dark coins on stone. She looked at the folded card without touching it. I turned off the oven and felt the switch click. The room cooled and smelled like brown fat fading. Steam ghosted the window and blurred the street lamp. Mark's gaze stayed on me like a held breath. My phone buzzed twice on the kitchen counter. Cold morning air slipped under the back door. A text blinked white on the cracked screen. He wanted coffee and a talk today. The cafe bell rang and echoed like a coin. Espresso fumes curled thick around a glass case. I wrapped both hands around a warm mug. Light from the window cut a hard line. He arrived damp from drizzle and shook his sleeves. His chair scraped tile and made teeth ache. A thin folder landed between us like bait. His smile held still under the neon open. "Thanks for meeting," he said and smoothed the folder. Steam hissed from the machine in short bursts. I tore a sugar packet and kept my eyes low. "What do you want?" I asked and tapped the mug. "Something workable," he said and opened the folder. Glossy pages flashed under the hanging lamp. The paper smelled like fresh toner and glue. "What am I looking at?" I asked slowly. "A program that helps," he said and nudged a page. My thumb slid over raised blue lettering and numbers. Donor applications lined up like little passports. "Why bring this to me?" I asked and leaned back. "It suits us," he said and tapped a chart. A family tree sketch ran down one margin. The ink bled slightly and smudged my fingertip. "You planned this already," I said and watched his hands. "Only groundwork," he said and clicked a pen. The sound cracked the air like a metronome. A small appointment card peeked from the folder. "You booked something," I said with my jaw tight. "A consult for you," he said without blinking. He slid the card across the wet tabletop. The cardstock felt smooth and wrong in my palm. "You used my name," I asked and watched him breathe. "They needed a contact," he said and sipped foam. The mug left a ring on the metal tray. I wiped it with a napkin that felt grainy. "Does she know this?" I asked and held the card. "She will later," he said and fixed his collar. The steamer roared like a small storm behind us. A silver spoon clinked hard in a nearby cup. "You met me alone for this?" I asked. "We can make it fast," he said with a nod. He folded a blank check and set it down. The paper edge pressed sharp against my thumb. "You think money solves this?" I asked and stared. "It handles logistics," he said and pointed at totals. Numbers crowded the page like marching ants. The folder's plastic cover squeaked under my grip. "You are crossing lines," I said and felt heat. "Time matters," he said and glanced at the clock. Fluorescent light buzzed and made the surface shine. He slid a lab slip with my date highlighted. "You scheduled blood work?" I asked and tasted metal. "Just to be ready," he said and leaned closer. His breath carried coffee and a trace of smoke. A water glass sweated between us like a warning. "You did this behind her back?" I asked. "She wants a child," he said and spread his hands. He pushed the envelope until it touched my mug. The edge left a damp line across the cardboard sleeve. "You are using her hope?" I said and felt sick. "Think it over," he said and closed the folder. The bell rang again and cut through the steam. I slid the card into my jacket with a scrape. "Not without her," I said and stood fast. Rain slapped the window and beat it on the glass. I stepped outside and the air smelled like rubber. The pointed card bent in my fist like tin. I stared at the date and felt everything sharpen. The door chain scraped metal as she pulled it back. Warm air smelled like lemon cleaner and old dust. Her hallway lamp threw a yellow oval on tile. She held a chipped mug and would not smile. "Come in," she said and stepped aside slowly. Steam drifted from the mug and dampened her fingers. I brushed rain from my coat onto the doormat. The lock clicked behind me like a decision. A blue folder lay open on the coffee table. Highlighter lines glowed under the standing lamp. Paper smelled like fresh ink and a little glue. She tapped a consent page with a shaking nail. "They gave me forms," she said in rubber palm. The radiator ticked and breathed dry heat. A silver pen rolled toward the edge and stopped. I watched the margins crowd with dates and blanks. "Sit here," she said and tugged the couch throw. The blanket felt pilled and rough along the seam. A coaster stuck to the bottom of my glass. Her eyes shone hard like windows at night. "They need a session for known donors," she said. The word known sat heavy between lamp and folder. I traced the cardboard edge and felt a dent. The apartment hummed like a sleeping machine. "What session?" I asked and lifted one page. A checklist rattled with boxes and small warnings. The paper rasped my thumb and left a curl. I swallowed when the word counseling stared back. "It is standard," she said and held the pen. She kept her voice soft while the kettle clicked. Steam climbed from the spout like a thin ghost. Her mug cooled fast on the cork trivet. "They flagged something else," she said and looked down. A thin report peeked out under the folder spine. The room smelled faintly metallic from the radiator. Her mouth trembled before the next sentence landed. "Scarring complicates carrying," she said and gripped the cushion. Light from the lamp flattened her face to paper. A tissue box waited near the remote like a lifeboat. I felt my pulse climb into my throat. "We could use a carrier," she said and blinked slowly. The tissue crumpled with a soft hiss in her hand. I set the remote aside and touched the folder. The lamp buzzed once like a tiny saw. "I need you Monday," she said and watched me. A calendar lay open with 3 squares circled. I rubbed the page and felt the glossy coat. The numbers swam under tears I would not spill. "New screenings too," she said and lifted a pouch. A sealed swab kit clicked against the coffee table. Plastic smelled faintly like a hospital corridor after mopping. She held it out as if it might jump. "Does he know?" I asked and looked at her phone. The device lay face down near the tissue box. It vibrated once and slid a finger's width. She flinched and kept her gaze on the kit. "He knows the appointment," she said and folded the sleeve. Her voice thinned when the phone buzzed again. Light leaked from the case like a trapped firefly. I let it glow and kept my hands still. "We will cover costs," she said and opened a drawer. An envelope full of receipts thumped onto the wood. Ink smelled old and edges licked my fingertips. A gold bracelet glinted near the bills like a wound. "You sold that," I said and touched the clasp. Her breath caught and the radiator clicked twice. She looked at the bracelet as if it spoke. I felt heat crawl up my throat like smoke. "There is another path," she said and slid a pamphlet. Embryo donation sat in tall letters over snowflakes. Paperclip teeth bit into the corner and left tracks. The standing lamp made the cover look like ice. "We could try this first," she said and watched me. A wall clock ticked and counted each beat. I smoothed the pamphlet until the paper warmed. My glass left a ring like a moon around crumbs. "Why me then?" I asked and lifted the coaster. The cork felt dry and gritty under my thumb. She looked toward a framed photo on the shelf. Her mouth opened and closed like a held breath. "We tried fostering last winter," she said softly. A small toy car sat under the TV stand. The room smelled like laundry soap and something missing. Her fingers hovered above the car and stopped. "It did not last," she said and pulled back. Light pooled on the hardwood like spilled milk. The toy wheel shone and refused to move. I felt the house hold its breath with us. "I will come Monday," I said and capped the pen. The cap clicked and sounded louder than it should. Her shoulders sank and the couch springs sighed. The swab kit waited between us like a dare. I stood and the floor groaned under my heel. Rain pattered on the window and ran in thin lines. My keys pressed into my palm like teeth. She followed me to the door without speaking. The hallway smelled like wet wool and old paint. My phone in my pocket and buzzed once. A new message blinked white against the dark screen. "We can do this without clinics," he wrote. I screenshot the text and saved it twice. Cold air hit my face as I stepped outside. An umbrella knocked my shoulder and snapped open. Streetlights burned through the rain like watchful eyes. He banged twice and the chain rattled hard. Rain hissed in the hallway and smelled metallic. I checked the peephole and saw his jaw set. I kept the chain on and waited. "Open up," he said with his coat dripping. Water pooled in the doormat and ran in threads. I moved to the kitchen and lit the burner. Gas bit the air and the kettle throbbed. 5 minutes, I said and wiped my hands. The towel felt damp and rough against my skin. The fridge hummed while I reached for my phone. I set it against the flour canister and breathed. The screen glowed pale under the cabinet light. My thumb found a recorder and tapped once. A small red dot burned like a coal. I angled the phone toward the doorway and waited. I slid the chain and opened the door slowly. Wet wool flooded the hall with a sour smell. He stepped inside and shook a brown paper bag. Drops sparkled on the tile like glass. "Thanks," he said and placed the bag down. The table creaked while the paper slumped open. Plastic rattled like teeth in a jar. Clear syringes glanced under the light and gleamed. "What is that?" I asked and touched the edge. My fingertip picked up cardboard dust and grit. He straightened a plastic cup with 2 fingers. The kettle began to moan like a warning. "A home kit," he said and tapped the cup. His breath carried coffee and a bitter trace. He pushed the bag closer and watched my face. The bulb buzzed and deepened the shadows. "You brought this here," I said and steadied the chair. The wood felt sticky from last night's spill. He nodded once and smoothed his wet sleeve. The cup wobbled and stayed upright. "We can be discreet," he said and looked around. His eyes flicked over the clock and knives. The kettle screamed and fogged the stove glass. I turned it off with a sharp twist. "Say what you mean," I said and lifted a mug. Ceramic heat burned my palm and steadied me. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. The paper crackled and stank faintly of toner. "You and me tonight," he said without blinking. "Quiet and quick," he said and touched the bag. The fridge clicked louder and made the glass rattle. I set the mug down and let silence hold. "You want me pregnant," I said and kept still. My voice felt like sand against my throat. He swallowed and his collar brushed his neck. A drop fell from his cuff like a bead. "It is best," he said an inch closer. His shoes squeaked on tile and left a smear. I grabbed the cutting board and raised it. The grain felt rough under my shaking hands. "Stop there," I said and pointed to the mat. The knife on the board flashed like ice. He paused and wet hair clung to his temple. The kitchen light buzzed and flickered once. "She will thank you," he said and spread his hands. His ring tapped the table and made a faint tick. I slid my foot to my phone on purpose. The red dot glowed steady under the lip. "You are crossing law," I said and stood square. Soap smell lifted from the sink and stung. He smiled without teeth and reached for the bag. Plastic whispered as his fingers dug deeper. "We do not need forms," he said and looked down. He lifted a vial with a white lid slowly. The vial clicked against the cup like a thread. I felt every hair rise on my arms. "Put it away," I said and tightened my grip. The board's edge bit the heel of my palm. He took one more step and lowered his voice. The clock counted out a flat heartbeat. "Family first," he said and tilted his head. A small puddle spread around his shoe. I shifted the board until the knife steadied. My breath fogged the mug and then cleared. "Back up now," I said and touched the phone. The screen warmed my fingertip and waited. He stared at the red glow and said nothing. Water ticked from the bag like a metronome. "You will regret this," he said and lifted the kit. His jacket rasped like paper against the chair. I stepped forward and he flinched from the blade. Light slid over steel like a warning flare. "Leave now," I said and kept my voice level. Wine from last night stained the coaster dark. He swore under breath and grabbed the paper bag. A syringe slipped free and skittered across tile. The syringe clicked against the baseboard and spun. My stomach lurched at the sound and shine. He bent to snatch it and banged the chair. I blocked the aisle and stared him down. "This is not over," he said and shoved the door. Cold air rushed in and smelled like wet iron. The bag crumpled and crushed against his chest. He slammed the door and left the chain swinging. I slid the bolt and leaned on the wood. The echo thudded in the frame like a drum. My phone screen showed the pulsing red line. I hit save and felt my hand shake. The kitchen settled and the kettle went quiet. Steam still purled on the stove like dew. I placed the phone on the table carefully. Its black surface held my face like a secret. "Come over now," I texted with slow fingers. The keys clicked and the speaker hissed softly. I attached the file and watched the bar crawl. The send icon held for a beat, then jumped. I poured a small glass and sat on the stool. The wine smelled heavy and sweet like berries. The coaster stuck to the bottom with a pop. Footsteps passed the door and faded downstairs. Headlights swept the window and spilled across dishes. The room brightened then went soft again. My palm pressed the cutting board and felt grooves. I kept the knife on the counter within reach. I called my mom with cold fingers and grit. The ringtone buzzed against my palm like a fly. A chipped mug steamed on the counter beside me. "Come over now," I said and watched the door. My dad answered from the background with a cough. I heard the TV hiss like distant rain. A keyring clinked on their hallway table sharply. "We are coming," he said and killed the sound. I wiped the table and set out 4 coasters. Lemon spray hung in the air like a threat. The wooden bowl sat full of oranges and worry. "We need to talk." I texted and locked the chain. They arrived quick and smelling like cold car seats. My mom folded her scarf and wrung the fringe. The porch light threw their shadows long across tile. "Where is she?" my mom asked and fixed her hair. "She's on her way," I said and moved chairs. The legs scraped the floor like a warning. A tissue box waited near the remote like bait. My dad set his wallet down and watched me. My sister stepped in with damp curls and trembling hands. Rain glittered on her sleeves under the hallway light. She hugged herself and bumped the umbrella stand. "Is this about him?" she asked and bit her lip. "It is about proof," I said and raised my phone. The tiny speaker hummed low like a wasp. A glass of water sweated on the coffee table. "Listen first," I said and hit the play icon. His voice spilled out and filled the room cold. The words clicked like metal on a plate. My mom gripped the sofa arm and felt the nap. "Stop it," my sister said and stared at the screen. "Keep it running," my dad said and leaned forward. The floorboard under his shoe creaked like a hinge. He touched the remote but never changed channels. The light from the TV washed everyone pale. I set a printed page beside the coaster stack. Fresh toners smelled sharp under the living room heat. Blue bubbles marched across the margin like ants. "He sent these today," I said and tapped the header. My sister lifted the paper and lost her breath. Her nails scraped the edge and made a rasp. The tissue box slid closer across the table. "Hero to someone else," she said and shook. A knock thumped hard and rattled the glass pane. The porch smelled like wet leaves and street oil. Mud speckled the doormat under a heavy shoe. "Let him in," my dad said and squared his shoulders. He stepped through and blinked at the lamp glare. His coat dripped onto the rug in slow beads. He reached for the chair, but never sat. "What is this?" he asked and wiped his sleeve. "Sit down," my dad said and pointed at the chair. The wood groaned when he lowered himself an inch. My mom set a coaster near his elbow, carefully. "Why the crowd?" he asked and looked at my phone. I placed another printout on the table between us. The paper clip bit my thumb like a tack. A clinic letterhead shone under the standing lamp. "You used her name," I said and watched his mouth. "That is nothing," he said and tried to smile. His watch ticked loud like a bug in a jar. He nudged the letter with a careless knuckle. "Explain the charge," my sister said and held her breath. Her phone buzzed and lit the room blue. The bank alert flashed across the cracked glass. A clinic name glared in bold like a stamp. "You paid a deposit," she said and gripped the case. "For planning only," he said and spread his hands. The ring knocked the table with a tiny click. He reached for the letter and stopped short. "Do not touch that," my dad said and stood. I slid a photo onto the wood grain slowly. Ink smelled new and the corners curled slightly. A plastic bag showed inside my kitchen light. "He brought this over," I said and watched his eyes. "That is a misunderstanding," he said and shrugged once. The ceiling fan hummed and stirred the warm air. A chair leg squealed as he shifted his weight. "You are lying again," my sister said and trembled. "Let me talk," he said and lifted his palm. Sweat shone on his temple under the lamp. A coaster stuck to his sleeve and then dropped. "Say it then," my mom said and traced the seam. "I wanted options," he said and stared at the rug. His voice dragged like a box across cement. He pressed his thumb into the table until white. "You wanted control," I said and slid the phone closer. He glanced at the device and licked his lips. The speaker hissed softly like a far radio. My dad's keys lay near the edge like silver teeth. "You trapped us," my sister said and swallowed hard. "Stop being dramatic," he said and leaned back. Leather creaked and a faint cologne rose sharp. He adjusted his cuff and flashed the metal watch. "Speak to your wife," I said and kept my tone flat. "Look at me," my sister said and lifted her chin. Tears shone like glass at the rim of her eyes. She crushed a tissue until it tore in strings. "Why did you write my cousin?" she asked and shook. He blinked fast and shifted his gaze to me. The lamp threw a bright bar across his face. He tapped his heel on the rug in a rhythm. "No cousin," he said and clicked his tongue. I opened a thick envelope and spread the pages. Paper rasped against paper like dry leaves. A contact name glared in black next to dates. "She sent screenshots," I said and pushed the envelope. My mom inhaled hard and reached for her rosary. The beads clicked soft like rain against window glass. She set them beside the TV remote carefully. "This is a sickness," she said and stared at him. My dad leaned close and smelled like aftershave and coffee. His hand closed on the chair back like a clamp. The wood strained under his grip and squeaked. "Have you heard her?" he asked and kept it flat. He looked at the carpet and then at the door. Sweat darkened the collar by a thin shade. He tapped the table and made the glass tremble. "I never touched her," he said and swallowed. "Words are enough," my sister said and wiped her cheeks. Her bracelet slid and caught the lamplight. She lifted the letter and folded it sharply. "This ends tonight," she said and held the fold. He stood fast and the chair scraped a harsh line. Cold air leaked from the doorframe like breath. His coat sleeve brushed the umbrella stand and rattled. "Move aside," he said and reached for the knob. "Not yet," my dad said and blocked the doorframe. Boots squared in a rug like stones and mud. The hallway light cut a stripe across their shoulders. "Sit down again," he said and did not blink. I opened my phone and cued the second clip. The thumbnail glowed against my skin like frost. The speaker crackled and waited under my thumb. "Listen all the way," I said and held it level. He lunged once and grabbed at my wrist hard. His grip felt damp and mean like wet rope. The phone knocked the table and skittered sideways. "Let go now," my dad said and shoved his shoulder. He stumbled and hit the chair with a grunt. The ceiling fan sang a soft whir above us. A framed photo rattled against the wall and tilted. He looked at it and then at the door. "Go then," my mom said and lifted her chin. Her voice found steel that matched the lamp glare. She picked up the rosary and set it down. "We will finish without you," she said and breathed slow. He yanked the door and cold rain blew inside. The hallway smelled like wet iron and old paint. He stepped onto the mat and left a dark print. "This is not final," he said and vanished into night. The house settled with a long sigh like a ship. Heat pipes ticked behind the wall with soft knocks. My sister held the envelope and stared through it. "Will you stand with me?" she asked and whispered. "I will," I said and pushed the phone forward. The black case felt warm from my pulse and fear. I set it beside the printed stack like a brick. "We start tonight," I said and lifted my chin. My dad reached for his jacket with a grunt. Leather creaked and the zipper rasped in the quiet. He picked up his keys and weighed them twice. "Name the next step," he said and waited. "Call your lawyer first," I said and steadied the stack. Paper edges bit my thumb and kept me awake. The lamp hummed over the table like a live wire. "We protect ourselves," I said and met their eyes. My mom brought water and set down 4 glasses. Condensation slid in silver trails down each rim. We stood around the table like a small wall. The hallway light burned steady over the open door. I dialed the precinct and pressed the phone to glass. Morning light cut across the table in pale bars. A pen rolled toward my hand and stopped. "We need an officer now," I said and watched the door. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and wet wool. A cracked bench pressed lines into the back of my legs. An officer flipped a small notebook and listened. "Start at tonight," he said and clicked his pen. I set the phone on the counter carefully. The case felt warm and slick under my thumb. The audio file pulsed with a thin red line. "Play it," he said and leaned over the badge. The speaker spilled tinny words into the fluorescent light. A box fan rattled against the window frame. He scribbled while the clip ran to the end. "That will help," he said and slid a form. We signed lines that smelled like fresh toner. Paper edges nicked my skin and stung. A plastic evidence bag crinkled beside the stapler. "Keep copies safe," he said and tapped the stack. She gave her statement with cold fingers on metal. Her breath fogged the glass between us and them. Tissues piled near the clipboard like small flags. "I am ready," she said and raised her chin. The officer printed a case card with thick ink. The machine whirred and spit it with a thump. He circled a number in blue and underlined. "Call this tonight," he said and met my eyes. We left into rain that smelled like street oil. A bus hissed past and sprayed our shoes. I tucked the card into my jacket pocket. The corner bit skin like a small tooth. My phone buzzed before we reached the car. Unknown number flashed white like a flare. My thumb hovered over accept and froze. I hit record first and then answered. "Talk now," he said and kept his voice low. Wind whistled through the line like a blade. I rested my palm on the cold roof. "Do not call again," I said and saved everything. We met the lawyer in a cramped office. Coffee smelled burned under the humming lamp. A legal pad waited beside a heavy stapler. "Tell me what you have," she said and uncapped. I slid the phone in the printed stack. Her pen moved fast and scratched like sand. She marked sections with bright flags and tabs. "We file protection today," she said and nodded. She explained service and restraints and safety. Her voice stayed calm while the clock ticked. A brass paperweight shaped like a gavel gleamed. "Money moves first," she said and set rules. We signed a retainer with a stiff blue pen. Ink smelled sharp in the recycled air. She clipped our copies to a thin folder. "Expect noise," she said and shut the cover. The courthouse elevator groaned and lifted us slowly. Fluorescent light washed faces, flat and colorless. A number display ticked up like a heartbeat. We stepped out into a hallway of doors. A clerk stamped paperwork with quick, rhythmic hits. Each thud traveled through the counter like thunder. Her nails clicked the keyboard and paused. "Here is your date," she said and slid a card. She fitted a temporary order into a clear sleeve. Plastic crackled around the paper like ice. The edge cut my thumb with a soft line. "Carry this always," she said and looked serious. We pushed through swinging doors into rain again. The air smelled like pennies and cold wind. A patrol car idled near the hydrant in steam. An officer nodded when he saw the sleeve. Back home, I called a locksmith from the stoop. Metal shavings curled on the mat like bright shells. He swapped the deadbolt and tested the throw. "2 new keys," he said and jingled them. I placed one key on the blue dish. The ceramic felt cool under my wrist bones. A sticky note waited under the dish like a secret. I wrote a code word and folded it small. The upstairs neighbor knocked with soft knuckles. Her hallway smelled like garlic and burnt toast. She handed me a tiny black drive carefully. "My camera caught something," she said and frowned. The laptop warmed my thighs and hummed. Pixels flickered and showed a shadow at midnight. A figure tested the knob and left fast. "That is his coat," she said and covered her mouth. I forwarded the clip to the case address immediately. The attachment bar crawled blue across the screen. A scent chime popped and echoed in the kitchen. I exhaled and watched the drive light blink. We packed a small bag for the week. Perfume lifted from a folded sweater like memory. A ring dish clinked as she set metal aside. "I stay with you," she said and zipped the bag. The spare room smelled like laundry and cedar oil. A single lamp threw a gold circle on sheets. I placed a glass of water on the table. She tucked the order under the pillow like armor. The clinic lobby buzzed with soft conversation. Hand sanitizer smelled sharp near the sign-in sheet. A clipboard waited with 3 pages of questions. "Write what feels right," the counselor said gently. We talked about grief under a skylight glow. A stress ball squeaked in my fist like rubber. She drew a ladder on a yellow pad. "Climb slowly," she said and wore kind eyes. Options lined the pamphlet rack like thin doors. Embryo donation sat quiet beside domestic adoption. Paper smelled like ink and clean cardboard. "We can meet both teams," she said and smiled. We booked 1 session for each path. The receptionist stamped dates with light, crisp taps. A jar of pens clicked as I returned one. "We will be ready," she said and squared her shoulders. At the police station, we dropped the new clip. Coffee burned my tongue from a Dixie cup. An officer logged the file on a dusty monitor. "Patrol will loop often," he said and tipped his chin. Night brought a car idling under our window. Exhaust drifted sweet and sour into the room. I parted the blinds with one finger slowly. A license plate gleamed then rolled into dark. I typed the numbers into the case email. Keys tapped like rain on a tin roof. The cursor blinked inside the subject line. A reply auto confirmed with a dull ding. Morning came gray with thin winter light. Toast crackled on the plate beside a knife. She read the court card and did not blink. "We show up strong," she said and nodded. "We met a social worker after lunch. Office air smelled like carpet and dry paper. A toy basket sat under a watercolor sun. Let us build a plan," she said and opened tabs. Background checks required prints and references. A scanner warmed and glowed green on glass. Our fingertips tingled as we pressed steady. "Good images," she said and saved the file. She opened a binder with careful hands. Metal rings squealed and flashed under the lamp. A page listed training with simple bullet points. "Saturday class works," she said and circled the line. Saturday class started with a swaddling drill. Clean fabric smelled like starch and hot air. A practice doll rested heavy in my arms. "Gentle and firm," the instructor said and adjusted cloth. We learned safety checks with outlet covers. Plastic plugs clicked into place with small pops. A checklist leaned against a toolbox on the floor. "Make a home ready," the instructor said and smiled. At the pharmacy, I bought a locking box. The counter smelled like bubblegum and rubbing alcohol. The cashier rang it with slow taps. "Keep papers inside," she said and bagged it. Back home, the lock turned with a clean snap. The new box sat under the lamp like a vault. I slid the order and clips into place. The lid closed with weight and certainty. A text chimed while we brewed tea. The kettle hissed and fogged the cupboard door. Unknown number offered an apology like a lure. We tilted the screen and stayed silent. "Forward it," she said and pointed at the phone. My thumb touched share and chose the thread. Steam rose and carried a lemon scent. The message flew and felt like a line cut. We filled divorce forms at the long table. Paper corners scraped my wrist in small bites. A fat blue pen bled slightly on wood. "Sign here," she said and steadied the page. The clerk accepted the packet with a nod. A rubber stamp thumped 3 times in rhythm. She slid a receipt with a staple in it. "Case number assigned," she said and met our eyes. We walked out into sun after days of gray. Warmth lifted the smell of asphalt from the street. A crosswalk signal blinked a white figure forward. We stepped together and did not speak. That night I sowed seeds into a terracotta pot. Soil crumbled under my nails and smelled like rain. She pressed a label into the rim with care. "Something that grows," she said and watched the dirt. The window caught city lights in small, bright chains. A spoon rested in a bowl beside the sink. We stood in the hush between kettle clicks. Tomorrow waited outside like a locked door.